All right. Welcome, everybody, both to our panelists and to our Facebook.
Hold on one sec, Courtney. One sec,
Okay.
Courtney.
I saw the message too.
And we're live.
Hi, welcome, everybody, both to our panelists and our Facebook Live audience. Thank you all for tuning in and joining us for another community conversation on race, organized by Community Action Partnership of Sonoma County. Today, we'll be talking about what can white people do, exploring privilege and allyship. And Community Action Partnership is dedicating tonight's conversation to the memory of Representative John Lewis, who recently passed on July 17th. And I'd like to read a quote from him to kind of just get us started. So here's the quote. "Take a long, hard look down the road you will have to travel once you have made a commitment to work for change. Know that this transformation will not happen right away. Change often takes time. It rarely happens all at once. In the movement, we didn't know how history would play itself out. When we were getting arrested and waiting in jail or standing in unmovable lines on the courthouse steps, we didn't know what would happen, but we knew it had to happen." So John Lewis's life and legacy in civil rights activism and public service definitely remind us how important these kinds of conversations are. And something that's so important is for us to really share our personal experiences with each other and really recognize how much power rests in sharing our stories. And that is one key goal for our conversation today, for us to share our stories with each other and with Sonoma County, with the broader community. And so I'll be the moderator today. My name is Courtney Bonam. I'm a professor of psychology and critical race and ethnic studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I study racial stereotyping and discrimination processes as they impact how people think about, feel about, and interact with one another, and how people build neighborhoods, cities, and schools. And I'll be starting us out today with a set of questions. And I'd like to just start by asking our panelists to introduce themselves. And I want to start with Vince. And Vince, so if you could just say your name, where you're from, or where you live now, and what brought you to this panel. And then if you could also talk a little bit about why these conversations are so important for CAP to be hosting, that would be great.
Thank you for having me. So my name is Vince Harper. My current position with Community Action Partnership is Director of Community Engagement. So I tell people I talk for a living. Where I came from, that's always an interesting question because my dad was in the Air Force and we moved a great deal. So I was born in New York. I lived in Michigan. I lived in Ohio. We lived in the Philippines for a bit, and then came out to California when I was, I think, 2 weeks into 7th grade, and have been in California ever since. I actually came up to go to school and play football when Sonoma State University had a football team. So I just love the area and love the people, and I decided to stay here. So I think there was a point where I hadn't lived anywhere for more than 4 to 6 years because we used to move around so much. So I would get antsy and want to do something drastic, a drastic change. So a little bit about me, and then back to the question about why these conversations are important. So I think that our history as Community Action Partnership goes back to the roots of the civil rights movement, and there's kind of a strong belief in terms of justice and equality and helping low-income people of color to achieve success in our society and to support growth as a nation. So thinking of the nation as an opportunity to really find that beloved community that Martin Luther King talked about in his day. So we also, I think it is important for us to, really talk about and take advantage of this opportunity when people are more open to talking about this subject. So with all the protests, all people who have not maybe had the discussion, maybe it's just been so far out of their lives in terms of talking about race as white people. And then obviously, Black people have lived with this issue, but I think now is just like a openness that hasn't been out there. And I think that it's also a time kind of to create a safe place where people could have these conversations about race. And so I think that is why, one of the reasons why it's important, one of the big reasons why it's important for Community Action Partnership to take the lead in terms of hosting these conversations on race.
Great, thank you, Vince. All right, and then Laurie Lynn, you wanna go next?
Sure. So I am the descendant of German, English, Irish, and Danish immigrants to this country. My family is from Denver, Colorado. My sister and I grew up in a community where we were two of very few white people. It was a middle-class community, and the majority of the folks who lived in Montbello, go Warriors, were African American. And so we had this really extraordinary upbringing in America, where we got to learn about Black authors and read Black history and understand a much broader view than many folks my age and older have been exposed to. And so we went off to college after being born and raised in this environment, to a university in Northern Colorado called the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley. And we used to have this sort of secret ritual where when we'd see each other on campus, we went to the same school, we would holler out this number to each other. And the number was how many Black people we'd seen that day. And it was usually like 2, 3, like we were recognizing that being in this world where there's a lot of white people at this university, it was very different for us. So I ended up getting my degree there in multicultural women's studies, and I checked my I'm a cool white person box and, carried on with my life for the next 20 some odd years, thinking, okay, I understand what's going on in the world. I've read the books, I've studied, I've had the conversations, I've done the protests. And then a few years ago, I was participating in a retreat with a teacher of mine who's from Jamaica. She's my drum teacher. Her name is Afia Walking Tree. And we were working on some aspects of her business. And by that time I had gotten my MBA and was doing what I thought was what she wanted, which was using aspects of that to influence the conversation and say, well, yes, here's this idea, but what if you did it this way? And this is what I've done in my experience. Like had all this good feedback that I felt I was being gracious and giving. And the next day she called me and said, hey, I need you to know that I experienced your participation in that part of the retreat as racialized. And I said, oh, that's, I wanted to defend myself and I wanted to assure her that's not what was happening. But the fact that this woman that I respect so much took the time to say to me, hey, pay attention. She used the words blind spot. I believe you have a blind spot here. And I had to stop and think and listen and understand, oh crap, this this thing that I think is just me, offering my best, coming from this place where I've been told my whole life, I can be anything I want, I can do anything I want. I've had teachers and colleagues and neighbors who have shown up and helped elevate me my whole life. And I assumed that's what was needed in that situation. And it was this profound recognition that showing up in that way was actually had the real potential and was in fact an act of my white privilege. And so I had to really slow down and back up and go, wait, I thought I knew this stuff. I thought I did all the study. And then shortly thereafter, Jay, who will share about his pilgrimage process, came back from the pilgrimage and said, hey, I want to start this Breaking White Silence group here in Sonoma County, and I want a co-facilitator. Would you do it with me? And it took me about 32 seconds to say, yep, I will. It was this way in for me to get back to reconnect. And so we studied some books together, and ultimately Jay and Vince and I all participated in another group that came from Project Pilgrimage that Jay was a part of, called Breaking Bread. So that is a very long way of saying that is why I am part of this conversation today, because of all those experiences that kind of stacked up on top of each other. And there's lots to pick apart in there, but that's the as short as I could make it right now version.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and we're looking forward to hearing more details about all the different initiatives you just kind of mentioned. So thank you, Laurie Lynn. And then Jay, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from and or where you live now and just what brought you to this panel?
Yes, thank you very much. And I first want to thank Community Action Partnership for hosting these conversations. They're long overdue for our community. I'm just so grateful to Vince in particular, but all of the leadership at CAP. So my name is J Mullineaux, and I'm a first generation college graduate who grew up in a housing project in upstate New York, about 3 miles outside of New York City. I was one of the fortunate ones who got to college on full financial aid through the Educational Opportunity Program, which was part of Minority Affairs at the University of Washington. But the first 30 years of my life was basically my own struggle of coming out, being a gay man, and being comfortable in my own skin. And then in the late 80s, I was in New York City at the time and kind of fell into activism when AIDS started to blow up in New York City. I happened to be at the Gay and Lesbian Center the evening that ACT UP New York got started. Raised my hand, joined the board the first night, and so got a deep dive into nonviolent civil disobedience. We shut down Wall Street one day and got arrested. I taught civil disobedience, so I got a real big dose of movement building. But like Laurie Lynn, I felt like I checked that box. I was the good gay activist, and kind of that was the extent of my activism. A couple of years ago, I had the great privilege of having the opportunity to go on a civil rights pilgrimage to the South. I got on a bus with 40 other people, mostly from Seattle, because it was organized by the University of Washington. And we retraced the path of the civil rights movement through Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi. And for the first time in my life, I saw the real truth of what happened during that time. It was about 50 years after that time, and people were beginning to retell the truth of what happened. It was transformative, to say the least. It was a real eye-opener for me. I came back with such a commitment to do something, but I had an experience of that beloved community on that trip. The power of the trip were the people that were there, the interracial, intergenerational space that was created. And once you have an experience of that beloved community, you will fight for it forever, and you will be in search of it everywhere you go. So since I got back, I've been in search of finding it, building it, and becoming a part of it. And that's why I'm at this conversation tonight.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks everybody for those introductions. I think Jay and Laurie Lynn, you both kind of talked in your intros about having this like wake-up call where you realized, okay, I have more work to do when it comes to confronting racism and your own whiteness, really. So I wondered if you could both talk a little bit about what spurred you to start the journey of becoming a white ally and to raise your awareness around race and racism. And Jay, I'll ask you to go first, and then I'll ask Laurie Lynn to add on.
Yeah, so I I had no idea when I went on the pilgrimage that I would be confronted with my own. I never thought about privilege or white privilege or being a white male with privilege. It was all concepts that suddenly, were upon me. And but there were so many experiences on the trip. The trip is designed for that's why I call it a pilgrimage. You're supposed to come back just transformed by the experience. But when I came back, I made like a couple of different presentations. I must have presented to over 100 people, just my experience there. Laurie Lynn was at one, and Vince was at one, a whole bunch of other people. And that's kind of how I started. I wanted to get people talking about it. I wanted people to realize that this didn't, even though it happened a long time ago, it's still going on. And we're perpetuating it. We need to do something about it. But there was one experience in particular. We went to many of the sites, obviously, and met many of the foot soldiers that were there at the time. But there's a day we went to the riverbank where Emmett Till's body was dragged out of the river, and we weren't supposed to be there. We were a little fearful of being there because the person who owned the property would probably have got a shotgun if he knew we were there. But we went there, and everyone went there with a white rose, and we had a ceremony along the riverbank. And it was the first time. I was only one of two white people, and there were maybe 6 to 8 white women on the trip. But it was an experience where I stood back and watched the Black folks that were on the trip, many who were parents, and I watched their experience. And many of them turned to me and were looking at me during that time. And I could see in their eyes, and I could feel in them what continues to happen to them. Like, this is still happening. It's not something that happened 50 years ago. And I could feel them calling. This happened to me a lot on the trip, people looking at me, calling on me to do something. And that was such a strong experience. So when I came back, I knew that I was on this journey, and that was it. Like John Lewis, I'm glad you started with that quote, because it's a long journey, but once you're on it, and get ready, because there's going to be a lot of hard work involved.
Definitely so. Yeah, and like you said, it's just continuing on. And I think we've had this national conversation around race and racial awareness, systemic racism, be spurred on by George Floyd's death, but similar to activism around Emmett Till's death. But this has been going on for a long time, and it's not really anything new now, but we're starting to talk about it in different ways. So yeah, we're all on the journey together. Yeah, and Laurie Lynn, what about you? Is there something that really spurred you on to start the journey?
I think I touched on sort of both ends of it. Growing up, seeing what was happening outside of my school. We were part of Denver Public Schools. I was on the volleyball team. We'd go to other schools, and I'd see how my team was treated differently. I could see it. It was very clear, and also it was very talked about. I remember, I had a boyfriend in high school named Brian Lopez, and we were, steaming up the windows in the car one day, one evening, and the police came and knocked on the window, and I got pulled out of the car and taken far enough away that I couldn't be heard, and like, are you okay? Is he doing anything appropriate? It was this very clear. There's clearness. There was a security guard at our grocery store, so when we would go and needed to shoplift, I would be the one who shoplifted, because I'd walk in with a group of people of color, and I was the only one who wouldn't get followed. It was just super clear, and it's not that it's just not okay, right? That idea that oppression anywhere is a threat to. I'm going to totally kill the quote, but it's just the recognition that there's the opportunity in the world for equity, and this brings up the thought of allyship a little bit. Again, my teacher Afia Walking Tree really spurs white people to move past allyship, and encourages us to actually become accomplices. It's shifting from a position of sort of tell me what to do and how to do it, to I know what to do and how to do it because I've had the conversations, I've done the work, I've talked to my friends, I've, you know, done the research, and that feels like a very important shift to address. And I think the other real big event in my life that I mentioned was Afia saying to me, this is a blind spot for you. And it was really interesting because when I spent time thinking about how I felt when I was giving her suggestions and when I was saying, oh, I think you should do it this way instead of that way, there's this distinct feeling that I had in my body. It was a little uncomfortable. And if I'm really honest with myself, it was this conscious, like, I know better than you. I know what you should do, and I'm telling you what you should do so that you can be the best at this. And I remembered when she said it, I'm like, this is in me, and she's right. And I recognized that feeling in me. I'd had it with another person who I was working with on a forum about race. So next time I sat down with Raul, I said, hey, my teacher told me this. This is what she said. She said she experienced me as having a racialized interaction with her. And I had this feeling when I did it. And I've had that feeling with you too. So can you tell me, like, have I acted racist towards you? And he said to me, Laurie Lynn, like, you're asking me this directly. I love you. And I would never, ever, ever even like the care with which he spoke to my question was tremendous, and led up to basically, yeah, you've done that more than once. And it was just this heartbreaking, gut-wrenching feeling of, but wait, I'm one of the good ones. If I'm one of the good ones, how is this possible? How could I do this? And now there's this greater understanding and recognition that, racism isn't something that individual acts that are done by bad people. It's systemic. I was trained for this. We've white people in America have all been trained for this. So now we have to do the hard work of unlearning it.
So true. Yes, we've all been socialized within this broader culture. Yeah. That I love that idea of being an accomplice, going beyond allyship. I can think of multiple times in my own life when many people don't know what my racial background is. They often ask me what I am, so I'll just say I'm Black and white biracial, just in case anyone was wondering. But so many times in my life, white colleagues or friends have looked to me and said, what can I do? And I just remember one time at work, someone asked me that, and I just said, it's not my responsibility to tell you that. You need to think about how you would answer that question yourself. And I think, Laurie Lynn, that's exactly what you were talking about, becoming an accomplice.
Right. And part of what I'm seeing as this conversation is coming more and more to the forefront is this idea that white people are looking to Black and Indigenous people of color to teach us how to be and how to not be, and what's okay and what's not okay. And I'm scared, what if I say the wrong thing or whatever? And what's really true is you can Google anything now. We don't have to pull aside our friends of color or our coworkers and say, oh, what should I do? You can literally Google, what should I do? And there's answers from people of color who have taken the time to, write it out. It's very accessible now.
Yeah, great. Okay, so now I want to ask both Laurie Lynn and Jay if you can both kind of talk about some key action steps that you've taken in this journey toward white allyship, and maybe even going further to thinking about being an accomplice. And then Vince, I want to hear from you if there are ways you've partnered with white friends and community members along their journeys too. So maybe Laurie Lynn, if you could start.
Sure. I think a couple of key action steps. One is these Breaking White Silence groups that Jay started and I joined. We got together with 6 of our, well, now good friends. Some of them are folks that I'd never met before. And we read first Robin DiAngelo's first book, What Does It Mean to Be White? And then Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. And we talked and we practiced and we came to each other with, okay, this happened this week. I didn't know what to do. I was scared to say anything. I know I should have, you know, like we worked through stuff and created this environment where it was safe and okay to do that. And I think Jay's pretty eloquent about the value of this. So I'll stop there. That was one key part of my growth, which is not anywhere near to over. P.S. I don't consider myself an expert here. I feel like I'm a passionate advocate for white people to learn about our whiteness and to learn about white supremacy and to understand systemic racism. And I'm on that path, I'm on that journey myself, and I'm screwing up right and left, which is part 2 of what I've done is screwed up right and left. I have offended people. I have embarrassed myself. I have gotten myself into positions of shame and anguish and fear and extreme discomfort. I've done all kinds of stuff that my Northern European upbringing said, don't do that stuff. It's been hard and scary and valuable and rewarding. I've lost friends. There are people who won't speak to me anymore. There are people that I'm afraid to look in the eye. This is messy. This is not Jay is he's very good at saying things in a way that doesn't offend, and I'm not that good at that. I'm much more direct. So there, other people don't have to take this same path, but that's the second thing. And then just the third thing is I've spent as much time as I can talking to my friends who are Black and Indigenous people of color, asking about their experiences, trying to understand, learning about what influences are going on in their lives. I've tried to listen and ask questions, be curious. Those are some of the main things that come to mind when you ask that question.
Yeah, and I just bet, Laurie Lynn, that approach of, maybe you acknowledging like, maybe I'm going to say the wrong thing, maybe I've messed up, but then your willingness to just continue re-engaging and continuing to try again, just stay in the game. That's so important.
It is. And really the people that I want in my life are the folks who are willing to have that big mess and that tangle and the discomfort and I just feel like I got hit by a truck, and then come back and be willing to talk it through and work it through and cry it through and yell it through, or whatever it is that's underneath all that. That's how I want to live my life, and I want the people in my life to feel safe living that way too.
Well, all right, Jay, what about you? What's your 2 cents?
So I think that I really believe there's a role for everybody in this work, and we all have to, figure out what that role is. And, my role is, I like to organize, and I think that comes from my, my days in, building the ACT UP movement and all the outreach that we did. And so I like to organize. So I like to, let's get a group together and start reading this book. And because I also feel like a lot of this is around persuasion, and we had to develop a literacy about how to even talk about this thing, because as many of us experience, There are going to be so many deflections of what we bring, you know. I'm also, I forgot to mention, my whole career has been in philanthropy and fundraising. And a big part of fundraising is you make the case for something, and you always have to be ready for the objections to your case. And you have to know exactly what that objection is, and you know what your comeback is. So there is some, like, yes, you need to be spontaneous as well, but the more training you have, the better at this you'll be, which is why I think forming these groups to read and practice with each other. We role played. We literally took every narrative that's now exists for a white person not to talk about racism, and we pretended we were friends talking to each other. We basically deconstructed those narratives together, just to give ourselves a sense that we can go out and do this. And yes, when we fail or we didn't do something, we'd come back and say, I didn't do, you know, I know I should have done something. Okay, how can we help you go back and deal with it? So I feel like that, but also I realized that you have to be careful when you're doing this in a white space to not get stuck there, and not to just do this because you want to all feel good that you're doing something. So it's important to be in relationship and dialogue with communities of color. So that's why the Breaking Bread concept, which is also another project, pilgrimage project from Seattle, they created these dinners where to bring together multiracial, intergenerational folks who you probably haven't had to your dinner table before. Every conversation is about race. One night we watched in advance Spike Lee's movie, Do the Right Thing, and we talked about it all night. We provided some food. Laurie Lynn hosted a couple, I hosted a couple. We had 4 of those throughout the year, just to build community and begin to build a sense that everybody belongs in this community, which is so important to the work that we need to do together. So that was one other thing. But I changed jobs during this process because I was tired of being in all white spaces. When I came back from the pilgrimage, it made me uncomfortable being in an all white space. And there isn't a lot of diversity, you know, in Sonoma County. I love low CN meetings for that reason, because that is what I think we're building toward. So I went to the junior college, and in January became the executive director there, because there's opportunity and possibility there, because it's such a diverse student population, and we have a lot of work to do though around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But you know, I'm in an environment now that allows me to do that and really make a difference.
Yeah, just like, what if every white person in this country decided to make such a significant change in their life? Like, for example, changing their job, or maybe another thought would be to move to a different location in order to like actually have more real substantive contact, interracial contact. So yeah, that's like a profound decision you made, Jay. So thanks for sharing that. And then Vince, what about you? How have you partnered with white friends and community members? What kinds of action steps have you observed and you know, among the white people in your networks or engaged in with them?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think that probably part of the survival armor that my parents gave me growing up it taught me to really understand my Blackness, be myself, and to also be unique at the same time. So we got this armor going around, and certainly there was a lot of people who tried to, you know, do some damage to me, but my armor protected me. And I think that I'm trying to think if I've ever been a good ally to white people trying to be good allies. And I've always been friendly. I've always been connected to kind of having to have kind of a multiracial friends, and not even thinking, you know, inside thinking about the dynamics or having these experiences out in the world, but of the dynamics, but really not having, not really truly feeling like people who, white people or people around me really understood what I was going through. And so I talked a little bit when we were doing the Breaking Bread about how things that I don't share in mixed company. And so I think for the first time, I felt like sharing of myself maybe was an opportunity to be, you know, to help other people understand my Blackness and my perspective. maybe being a better ally at that time so that they could be better allies. Can't even say the word. Being better allies in the rest of the world. So just kind of running that through my head. And so I'd have to say, Jay and Laurie Lynn, have I been good at helping you to be a good white ally would be the real question here. Because I feel like I still have a lot to learn on how to be, since, as soon as, the Black Lives Matter and everything blew up, white people were calling me and sending me emails and saying, oh, what can I do? What can I do? And I was thinking, I think I'm going back to what you said, Courtney, am I really qualified to tell them what to do? I know, I guess I can tell them what I need or give them some ideas. So I think in some ways being a good listener and then I like to think of myself as someone you could bounce stuff off of. If you have an idea, bring it to me and I'll say, that's racist. Or, hey, that's a great idea. You should explore that. Or, giving people, books to read or ideas of books to read, or people sharing books with me and asking my opinion. So I go through this reading so that I can give my opinion of this to a white person, but I don't. So I think maybe that's kind of the gist of how I've been supportive, and I want to continue to be supportive because I've had this aha moment where I don't have to distrust every white person that comes along, or not trust the fact that they really want to know. And they might be clumsy about it, because we don't talk about these things, but maybe in talking about these things, we can get over the clumsiness and get to the real root and actually solve some problems.
Yeah, and it's okay to be clumsy in that process. Yeah. And Vince, of course you're qualified to give advice to white friends, but I think, you don't necessarily have to, right? So the way that you were pushing back, I think, is important to acknowledge. And then also this idea of like being honest with the white people in your life who approach you and ask, how to get involved, or, like being honest about like, okay, what is my perspective as a person of color on this topic or this way of interacting, this like racialized interaction, like what Laurie Lynn was explaining. I think that's so important too. Okay, so we're starting to run out of time a little bit, but we have so many things that we still could talk about. So and then we have a question too from the Facebook Live audience. So I want to make sure to get to that question. So I'm going to ask you all this next question, and I want you to try to be as brief as you can. But this next question I think is really important, so I definitely want to get to it. So, you've all kind of talked about your journey to being more conscious about race relations and really confronting whiteness, becoming a white accomplice and an ally. And so that's a challenging process, and mistakes will definitely happen. So I wanted to hear from all of you, at time permitting, what about some potential pitfalls along the way? So in this journey to white allyship and racial consciousness raising, what are some pitfalls that you've observed in yourself or maybe someone else, and how have you effectively managed those potential pitfalls in your own journey? And a couple of things that I think Laurie Lynn and Jay kind of touched on that are relevant in our conversations preparing for today are cultural appropriation and white saviorism. So if you want to speak to those, cool. Or if you want to talk about something else, then that's cool too. And try to keep it brief. And then I guess Laurie Lynn, if you want to go first, that'd be good.
Rats, I was hoping you would say Jay. Okay. Pitfalls or cultural appropriation? Oh my, where to go? I think the cultural appropriation story is sort of easier to downsize a little bit. One of the things that I love in my life, quite possibly the most, is drumming. So I've spent 13 years doing taiko drumming, and have been for the last 8 years doing African drumming. This came up as a result of Vince mentioning that he saw me drumming at Juneteenth last year. There was a lot of anxiety about me participating in that event as a drummer, as a white person playing African drums at an event designed to honor a moment, a very pivotal moment in African American history, wearing African clothes and not knowing how that was going to be received, and how I could walk in that space. I remember Jay actually reminded me when we were talking about this, talking with our group about this, like, I don't know if this is the right thing to do or not. I hope I'm not just coming off as this, white person who believes she owns drumming and can do whatever she wants to do. And it was really great to go, and Vince was at the event, and I got to talk with him in advance and hang out with him, and we did our drumming, and there were dancers as well, and it was quite a beautiful event. And there was nobody said anything to me other than thank you. And that was a big important thing to me. And one of the things that has felt really important to me on my drumming journey, whether it was doing Japanese drumming or now African drumming, West African and Jamaican drumming, the way that I kind of get around, the way that I am not appropriating culture, I'm not taking it on as my own, is by making sure that I learn the meaning of the music and understand where it comes from. And I'm passing that along through me. I'm participating in a legacy that's being passed on to me, and I'm doing it with respect and thought, and that feels like the best that I can do, in terms of not just taking it on as my own and saying, okay, I know this, I got this, here's the rhythm, let's go. Does that get to where you were hoping to go, Courtney?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And our organizer tells me we can go a little past 6:30. So, if you want to throw something else on there, you could. But yeah, thank you. But yeah, this is that idea of acknowledging, where the practices are coming from, and, trying to understand, striving to understand the meaning behind it all, and communicating that acknowledgement, I think is, so important. And then Jay, you want to talk a little bit?
So I guess the point that I wanted to make is, as I mentioned, I've been in the field of philanthropy my entire life. And, I just, again, once you're on this path and once you're doing this work, you begin to, start peeling off the layers, because it is, there are so many layers, and this has been so baked into our systems for such a long time, that I think one of the pitfalls is to be careful sometimes when you think you're doing good, but you're actually doing harm. And I use philanthropy, because I think a lot of philanthropy is based in, let's save people, and you hear the stories about, we build people up as all these poor people, and if we don't save them, they're going to have horrible lives. And you see all the fundraising pitches that are made, and I've been to a few events where they've made pitches like that, and I've left feeling like, wow, that is just like, we need to stop treating people that way. We don't celebrate people as assets and what they have to bring to the table, their culture. We just, we want to, but I look around the room and everyone feels like, makes everybody feel good. Like, we're saving people, and like we need, so this, I read Edgar Villanueva's book, Decolonizing Wealth, a couple of years, which I really appreciated that he finally came out with a book about decolonizing wealth. And I think we've just started the process of stepping back and really looking at what we've been doing and the narratives we've created around needs. And I just think philanthropy in general has been so focused on changing people and not changing systems and policy. So, and we've been talking about equity diversity and inclusion now for a couple of years, but it's largely been talk and there hasn't been a lot of action. So I think this moment and this movement right now is going to push us forward. And I feel that it is, so that we can finally get to, in fact, I saw an article online recently where it basically draw a parallel between the nonprofit community right now. Like we are the white clergy that were saying nothing and doing nothing during the civil rights movement. When Martin Luther King wrote his letter from the Birmingham jail, the nonprofit community, we are that white clergy. And it's time for us to do something and break our silence and finally speak up and do something.
All right, that's a strong statement. I like it. Cool. And then Vince, can you talk maybe about insight that you've gained into these potential pitfalls from your community engagement work and any other personal experiences you have interacting with white community members?
Yeah, I think that on a personal level, I think some of the most challenging times around having these kinds of conversations is when people just don't listen, to, my story or the stories of African Americans, and not really truly listening to understand, that listening more to argue or to be defensive about whatever it is. So, maybe there's a surface level where they say, okay, that incident was a problem, but it has nothing to do with all of these other incidents that have happened to Black people all over the country. And I was trying to explain it to my family. We're doing these Zoom calls every weekend. And so, obviously this has been a big subject that we've talked about. It's like, why now? Why this killing, this murder by the police versus any other murder? Why did it all of a sudden explode? And why don't white people understand, why there was an explosion, all of a sudden? I was thinking about it. And what I said was that, like for us, it's like a pressure cooker. Each incident is proof of something's wrong with the system. Somebody's dying, somebody is being abused, and it's somebody who looks like me or looks like my mother or my brother or whoever. And so it's a pressure cooker for me, but to a white person who doesn't really connect all these dots together, it's just an individual injustice. And so it's like, okay, whatever. And whereas I think, in the Black community, we want justice. And so we're exploding. And unfortunately, sometimes it's harmful to our communities, but it's a real thing, this pressure that's built up over time. And it was just that one more thing that kind of blew the top off of the cooker. And so that's how I started to look at it. So being able to really, in conversations, to be able to say, hey, I think that there was something, that person was racist, or this thing was racist, or this, the system, there's systemic and structural problems. And it's like, well, maybe, you get a lot of white people who say, well, it's because Black people are more criminal. And I'm like, what? It's like there's a justification for it, and they don't see how that kind of cuts at you all the time, to know that you can't even have the conversation about the roots of this issue, about this history, the systemic issues, without those kinds of comments. And I think that's a big pitfall, and it makes it difficult to even want to talk about it without getting angry and emotional, because it's like cutting off the conversation before you have a chance to make your points, those kinds of things. So being able to be, I think that's one of the biggest pitfalls I've seen throughout my life in terms of dealing with this. And then, oh, sorry, I was just going to say one last thing to talk.
Yeah, go ahead, keep going. Yeah.
Talk versus action is a big one. So I think Jay just mentioned it, but the idea of, there are people who, white people who are like, oh, the world's so wonderful. I'm on your side. It's, about justice. But then when it comes down to it, you have those times when they are part of the problem because they aren't listening. They aren't, they talk a good game, but it's not, the actions isn't there. So, all my life I've watched that. So it's kind of my training. That's my racism training, is that I look for racism because, when something doesn't go exactly right, I'm like thinking, is that because something I said, or was it a racist thing? So I'm questioning that. And so when that comes through, maybe not intentional, it's like, oh man, I'm disappointed again.
There was so much in what you just said. But I just want to pick up on the first thing you were kind of talking about, where, you're trying to have a conversation. We know that even just having the conversation isn't enough, but even just trying to talk about things with people, they don't always recognize the problem and recognize how example after example after example can just be so, can just weigh down on you so much and be cutting. Like, what I think that's the word that you used.
Yeah.
Like poignant imagery for sure. And that kind of relates to a question from one of the viewers on Facebook Live. So I'm going to read this question. So this comes from Michael Edward Dorch, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. So he's saying the obvious question is, who could possibly object to things like equal rights for all? It seems like the only way to deny the need for change is to believe there is no problem. How do we respond to objections such as these? So when someone is taking this attitude of, there's not a problem there, of course, we can all agree that equal rights are a good thing, but actually there's not really a problem that we have to surmount. How do you all respond to those kinds of comments? And I think that's kind of like getting underneath what you were just talking about, Vince, where people aren't recognizing the way that everything weighs on us.
Well, there are really clear examples in nearly every system that makes up our country's way of being that show that there actually is a problem. You can look at the criminal justice system and you see the way in which Black and brown people are what's the word, more incarcerated than other people. You look at education systems and you see how Black and brown people are erased from history, how the folks who excel in school are not generally anybody other than white. There's always exceptions to the rule. There's always exceptional people, amazing folks who make it through anyway. You look at the entertainment system and you see exactly what Vince was just talking about. Black people are criminals, white people are heroes. Like that.
Those are the representations.
Yeah, and this is I'm obviously super simplifying, but you can go through every system and say, yeah, actually, no, there's a problem. There's a problem in all of it, and most people are engaged in something in their lives. They're teachers or they're politicians or they're whatever their work is in the world. We can actually, in those cases, we can drill down and say, actually, this is how it's impacting your life. This is what it looks like in your life, and this is where your privilege is showing up. And the bottom line is that not seeing a problem is a function of white privilege, right? It's a function of white superiority. It's saying what I see, even though most white people in America live in segregation, they don't, even though they don't have regular daily contact with Black and Indigenous people of color, we can still choose to say there's not a problem. And that's kind of the big thing about this whole issue of racism is that in order to undo it, it requires a choice by white people to look at their own power. So that's the other piece, is we have to inspire people to look at that, to make that choice and to take a look.
Yeah, so true. So true. Yeah, Vince, Jay, did you want to chime in?
Well, I just love this. People often, because we've been taught our whole lives that just treat everybody equal and then you'll be a good person and everything's fine, no problems. But the problem with that's just not the truth. I mean, people have not been treated this equally for such a long time. There's so many examples of that. And I love this quote by Ibram Kendi that said, "The only solution to past discrimination is current discrimination, and the only solution to current discrimination will be future discrimination." So we have to start bringing real equity into this conversation. And yes, reparations as well have to be part of the conversation. So because, I mean, otherwise we continue to benefit from keeping things the same all the time. But I'm not comfortable with that any longer.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, our government won't even entertain the possibility of forming a committee to explore reparations for African Americans. So we're not even willing to have the conversation, to have the conversation about thinking about doing it, let alone actually implementing the policy. And so, I think just hitting people with examples like that, like statistics, concrete facts, to just clarify, we still have a problem now, and it's been going on for a long time. Like like when John Lewis was starting to become an activist, during that time with SNCC and everything, we started making change, but we still have a long way to go. And so, some of the work that I've done and my colleagues do shows that, when people start learning that history and about, for example, these concrete policies, federal policies, the ways that our government have really set up two different ways of life for white people and people of color in this country, that can help shift people and help them recognize that we do still have problems today. But you have to get that captive audience too, though. So it's a challenge. I think Jay, were you going to say one more thing, and then Vince, if you want to.
Well, I'm just dealing. Now that I'm working, at a college, dealing with the restrictions of Proposition 209, which just prohibit colleges from doing really anything that's race-based. So, and of course, it was sold to the public as an anti-discrimination amendment and the discrimination. So, but it holds into place all the discrimination that happens against communities of color. So we have to overturn this proposition in the fall. If you haven't checked out Proposition 16 yet, please do so and start sharing it with your friends, because 209 makes it really difficult for colleges to do a lot of things that are race-based, which gets to the equity that we've been talking about.
Yeah, thanks for that plug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to get it in the end.
Nice. Let's see. So Vince, did you want to chime in?
I just wanted to point out or share that just over my time in terms of dealing with equity, and I've been on some committees and some boards, and one of the things that came up for me is just the fear that if this other group gets equality, that I lose something. So that going back to that privilege, I've been privileged all this time. So that if I give that up, I'm losing something. So I'm losing maybe an opportunity for my son or daughter. Maybe it's an opportunity to maybe thrive in a way that I think I should be thriving. And then there's also that kind of hidden caste system, of superiority that, there's as long as there's someone down beneath me, then I must be doing okay. And I think that fear of losing something, that fear of maybe losing your history, like we're seeing in the South and actually not far from here, James Monroe, the talk of renaming schools and those kinds of things, a fear of losing this heritage that maybe wasn't exactly true or wasn't exactly all it was cracked up to be. But that's important to people. That's all you have. So, you know, and I posed this question one time with one of the committees. I said, why would you want equity if you were a white person? You lose in some ways. But how do we look at it as not a loss, but as, you know, maybe, you know, increasing the pie, making it so that it's a more fair and just type of society, rather than thinking of that fear of losing something or someone or whatever that is.
Right. Yes, and as long as the racial inequality persists, we're all losing. Like shift, how do you shift people into that mindset?
Yeah, and if you're not losing right now, you know, you have more of a fight in you to not listen and not to want to explore these deep roots. All the slaves, there's no. I keep hearing all the slaves are non, you know, have passed away. So why give reparations? You know, in that story of history, there was like a gap in the history. It wasn't just, oh, one day you were free, and then all of a sudden you were, you know, you had the right to vote, you had the right to own land, you had the right to live no, Jim Crow and you know, the new Jim Crow. I mean, you just go on, that it's so big and complicated sometimes that I think sometimes people just want to just be simple.
Yeah. So here's another question from our audience, and then I'm gonna, and then we're gonna do kind of like a wrap up round robin too. So one more question from our audience. What do you all say to people who claim all lives matter?
So for me, it's I just feel like that's a deflection, because I've been in situations where, and I've seen this happen when you start talking about Black, you know, just Black lives or anything, and people they switch it to like, well, you know, I'm a woman and I've been discriminated against as a woman. You know, they're going to go on to their own story. It's like, but I know, but right now we're talking about Black lives, the Black experience. You know, it's people, you know, say, oh, that reminds me, and I had a similar. No, that's not what we're talking about right now. So it's just that we have to bring a focus on Black lives. I mean, truly, but the person that created this quote said, you know, we have to make Black lives matter so that all lives can truly matter. Because otherwise, by saying all lives matter, you're saying, I don't give a crap about Black lives. I want to expand. It's like, if you can't focus on this, then we aren't going to get to all lives matter, period. So that's just, I feel like, and that's, white people are experts at deflecting and not, you know, not to really talk about the issue or really drill down to what you're trying to get at. They'll throw up all kinds of deflections.
I think that's very well said, Jay. And I think the only addition that I would make is that history in America teaches us that what's happened to Black people in our country deserves our attention. And it absolutely 100% plays into, it's what Vince was just saying, that it's still here. The unspoken words, the unhealed wounds, the bigotry and terror and all of those things that Black people in our country are living with every single day, it must be repaired. It must be heard and held and looked at and listened to and felt and carried as mine, right? Like, it has to be in my heart in order for me to be able to say, you know, these are my brothers and sisters on this planet. These are folks who matter. And to me, that historical journey brings that to light and shows us why we must spotlight Black lives, maybe not just now, maybe for a really long time, until there's healing, until it's healed, until it's repaired. That feels important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And saying all lives matter erases all of that.
Yeah. Thank you for closing that loop. Yes.
Yeah. But yes, it's all connected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so. There are a few other topics that I think are would be important to discuss, but we do have to end soon. So I'm just going to throw out a couple questions for people to just ponder. And so one of the things we kind of wanted to talk about, but won't have time to fully dig into, is this idea of being afraid to speak up or act out against racism, which all of you have done and are doing. And I know that that doesn't necessarily come easily or naturally to you all or to anyone, not to me. And so I think it's important to consider, when does the fear stop us from acting out, speaking out? And what are some times when we've been able to push through that fear? I think all of us have probably experienced that. Like, I know I personally have experienced times when I was too afraid to say anything in response to a comment like "All Lives Matter," and then other times I've been able to speak out or act. So, I think we all have fears when it comes to speaking out against racism. Sometimes they stop us, sometimes they don't. How can we push through the fear? And then another topic that we could have gotten to was just kind of considering what are some challenges that you still have left to face along the journey to becoming a white ally and accomplice. So in other words, what are some of your areas for remaining growth as a person confronting your whiteness? And so so you can just kind of keep those questions in mind as we do one last round. And if you want to, kind of say something brief in response to those, that's cool. But the question I wanted to end with is just this idea, coming back to the idea behind the panel. So what can white people do? So, if you had to list maybe 2 or 3 just kind of discrete things that white people can begin doing, because this is an ongoing struggle that we all have to engage in or should be engaging in for, a long period of time. So what are maybe 2 or 3 discrete things that white people can begin doing? And, you can feel free to elaborate a little bit, maybe on a personal experience that kind of explains where you're coming from, or touch on a couple of those other questions that I just posed to. And let's see, Vince, do you want to start us out this time?
I think, wow, those are a lot of deep questions.
I know there's a lot. So really, you can just kind of closing thoughts, throw out what you want.
What I would say is that I think I'll touch on the kind of the last topic that you hit on. What I think that white people can do, and I think is, I think one of the things be a good listener. So listen to understand, and but don't expect Black people to have to explain everything to you. You got to do some work. So I like that Jay and Laurie Lynn talked about these books, these resources, these movies that people can go read or explore, and then come back to me with quick questions. Just kind of don't expect the fountain of knowledge to roll out, but when you are there, listen, don't get defensive, and really try to understand. And I know it's hard to walk in someone else's shoes, but the importance of maybe walking beside them and building trust with them is really important. And I think one of my other, and this is a big one, so it isn't a starter one, but is to look at injustice not from just those little things. You don't have to hear the N word, to see that something is wrong or that justice isn't there, or also looking at kind of that structural and that post policy. And the big one right now is voting rights for me, thinking about all the voter suppression that's happening down south. So we live in a fortunate community. We have a really good elected officials who are looking at our voting system, but then you go to Georgia, Texas, or other places where they're just, it's just so blatant, be able to answer that call to write letters, to get involved in injustice, no matter where it is. So was it a threat to justice? Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Yeah.
I've got to get that quote for you. So really, you gotta, act up. You gotta be involved. You gotta get engaged if things are going to change. And Black people we've been crying out for so long for allies and crying out for someone to say, don't you see? You said over here that you believed in equality and all that, but here's a demonstration of where it isn't working, and you aren't saying anything about it. But if something happens to a white person, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that. It's be consistent is kind of my need. So
Great.
I'm getting excited.
Thank you, Vince.
That's my pet.
Thanks. Thanks, Vince. All right, Jay, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I just, you've all heard about the book group. So you all need to start one of those, because if we have those going all over Sonoma County, lots of Breaking White Silence groups, I think that would be incredible. I actually have a reading group at work right now. We're reading How to Be an Anti-Racist. The staff at the foundation's reading that. But one of my favorites, I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up, given the field that I'm in, philanthropy. We all must start following organizations that are really doing the policy work that needs to change. So there's lots of great ones out there. My favorites are the Equal Justice Institute because of their prison reform work, Black Lives Matters, the NAACP. There are a lot of really good ones. Most of them are led by people of color. We need to get behind these people and these organizations. They need our financial support. Their work doesn't happen with no support. So we need to realign our giving with our values. And right now our values are Black Lives Matter. And then the third one my first post after George Floyd's murder was about, and I said, if you could just do one thing to help, and I plead with my white friends to stop saying you're not a racist, because I believe if everybody makes that shift, and I had a lot of people say, oh, I had to really read that, and it really started to sink in, and I think there were 23 shares of that particular post, because this journey for me where racism used to be an individual act against a person. I didn't do that. And then I learned that it's a systemic problem. Well, I didn't create that problem, and it's not but then Ibram Kendi introduced this concept like, there's no such thing as not a racist. You're either a racist or you're an anti-racist. So which one you're going to be? And a lot of times you're probably going to go in and out of being, for a while, because that's part of our privilege to say, I'm not going to do that today. But until people shift into being an anti-racist, I don't think a lot of change will happen, because we're going to sit back and say, that's not me, that's those white supremacists in the South. But we all have to make that shift for true action to happen.
Yep, we all have a role to play.
Yeah.
And then Laurie Lynn, thanks, Jay.
So things that are similar or additions to what Vince and Jay have both said in terms of what we can do. One is to really get the voices of Black and Indigenous people in our lives, and not just go watch a movie and call it done, but like every day do something to get those voices in our awareness, to hear from our relative segregation, to hear. Netflix is a great resource for getting Black voices in. Podcasts are amazing. If you follow The Moth or are looking for a great way to hear about true stories told live, they're doing an amazing job of really highlighting Black voices right now. It's a great way to get inner goodness. There's a million books, fiction and nonfiction, that are available to us. There's a lot of ways and Vince mentioned early on, like, talk to your people of color in your life, talk to them, get that voice in there. That seems really important. The second thing that seems really important is we must do our work. We must do our work in here, and we must do our work in our hearts. There's no way around it. If you're doing anti-racist work and you feel good, you're maybe not doing it right. Like, this is not for the faint of heart. This is really deep, emotional, scary, hard work that we must do, and we must do it together. Don't do this alone. Jay's idea of everybody having a book group is a great one. And don't wait until you feel comfortable, because you know what? You're never going to feel comfortable. This is never going to feel easy. It's never going to feel right. We are undoing, I'm undoing 44 years worth of socialization in my life, plus the 356 years before that got us to this place. So that's an important piece. And then I think, please, I feel really almost begging that we must stay the course as white, as the protests start to die down, as the news is changing to the next big sensational thing. We must stay in. We must stay present. We must stay focused. We can't say, I'm too old, I'm too tired, this isn't my thing. This isn't, it's not necessary anymore. We did it. It's done. We're in post-racial America now. All of those things are unfortunately lies that white supremacy tells us. It feels really urgent and important for us to acknowledge that while my life on a daily basis has not changed or shifted as a white person in America, every single day there is more than one Black person who is afraid for their lives and feels terrified by the idea of being pulled over by a police officer or being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. And if there's even one of those very precious Black lives in our community somewhere, then we can't rest. That's my thought.
Thank you, Laurie Lynn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a great kind of thought to end on, I think, too. Just there was a lot in what you said, and just kind of resting on this idea that if even one Black person is fearing for their life, then there's still more work left to be done. So it's, every single Black life matters. Yeah. So I just want to thank everybody again. Thanks Jay, Vince, Laurie Lynn, for sharing your stories this evening and your insight with all of us today. And thanks to all of you for tuning in to this conversation. Definitely stay tuned for more details about the next community conversation. The conversation will continue next week on Facebook Live, and then there will be even more sessions going along with this theme of conversations on race in the coming weeks as well. So thanks again, everybody. See you all next time.
Thank you.
Could be.